Through our journey and through the documentary of Mallory's Army, what I really wanted to do was continue this voice and continue to showcase other people's stories. Because I think that one of the biggest obstacles that we have is that people feel sorry for you for a few months. You know, they feel sorry, but then they expect you to move on, and what they don't understand is that you never move on. So I wanted to use my life to showcase other people's stories and the things that happen to them, but also what they're doing. They're taking on challenges that I didn't know needed to be taken on, and now that I'm living it, I go, oh, now I can get it. Today's show is really going to be about debunking some of the myths around mental health, but then more importantly, the mental health services field, which is why I'm so happy that you're here today. Laurel, let's start with you.
My name is Laurel Grossman. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a master's degree from Seton Hall and an EDS degree from Seton Hall, which means I'm a specialist in my field. I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I absolutely love what I do.
And Rebecca?
My name is Rebecca Perlman-Caniglio, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I got my undergrad degree at Boston University and my master's in social work from Columbia. I was a school social worker for a long time, an elementary guidance counselor, and now I have a private practice specializing in people suffering from anxiety.
What's the biggest difference between you two?
So my mother's a licensed family therapist, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but what we do is we do the talk therapy, we do the counseling piece.
Okay.
And then what we do is try to work with psychiatrists in the area, and a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They're the ones who are going to be able to prescribe the medication. It is really my professional opinion that when you have the right doctor, the right psychiatrist, and the right counselor together, that's where you're going to really hit your mark of really helping people to feel better and be able to live a better quality of life. They kind of really go hand in hand.
Okay, so I love that you were talk therapy.
Right, so we do the counseling piece. Really supportive, trying to help people get to the bottom of what's making them feel uncomfortable. Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it loss? Is it divorce? What is going on? What is the transition? You know, are they going off to college? Whatever it is that brings them there in your office that day, you can unravel like an onion. Well, what's underneath that? And that's where the medical piece, is it a chemical in their brain? And if so, that's okay. Right. But you have to get that diagnosis from a medical doctor and then get the right treatment, because we can sit and talk all day, and I will and I can, but I can't put the serotonin in your brain.
Right.
So it's almost like once that's in place, then you can really access what we're talking about, and then you can really come up with the coping strategies and be able to actually try to implement them and generalize them into everyday life. But when you're not in the right frame of mind to do that, it's kind of like we say Charlie Brown is like wah wah wah, you can't take it in, and then people get frustrated, and then, well, you're not fixing my kid. Well, first of all, there's no fixing them, and second of all, everything has to sort of be working right to move forward.
That's a good point. The difference also is I see more adults than I see children.
Right.
When you recommend to an adult, maybe you might need some medication, their first response is no. So it might take you a long time to make them understand that the pairing of medicine and talk therapy is actually what's going to help them. So a mother with a child is so invested in making that child feel better, be more productive, be happier, that they will take your opinion and your advice.
As a mom, if I'm looking for someone, explain to our audience what they should be looking for.
Okay. First of all, if you have a really good pediatrician, that's a really good connection to say, because they see children all day long.
That's a good point. Yep.
So you can always ask them for referrals.
The reason why I wanted the two of you together is because you are a mother-daughter team. You probably could do this all day long, but you have two different journeys. And I think that that's so important, because I find in my journey of talking to parents, oftentimes it's said, when I was a kid, it doesn't matter what it was like when you were a kid, because today's children are having such a completely different journey than what we had as children. And I think that we've got to get rid of this. When I was a kid, this is how we handled, it's almost like this suck it up buttercup kind of mentality. And that's not our today's kids' journeys. When do you think is the right time and the right age for a parent to seek mental health services for their child if they start to see something? When is the appropriate age?
When you see a change in your child, when they come home and they're not their usual self, and you sit down and talk to them, and they can then open up to you and tell you what's wrong, that's maybe when you start thinking about bringing in a mental health provider, because when we do this, they're in a safe place. There's no parents, there's no teachers, There's no kids their age. It's all about them. And that's one of the few places that they feel safe.
Right now, too, it's something that's really different that I've even noticed, even with my own daughter, is like when you go to the pediatrician for a wellness visit, they do like a questionnaire,
right.
And which we never had that before. No. So that can be a red flag. Anytime a teacher reaches out, that they see something in school, sometimes other kids reach out, tell a parent, I'm worried about, or you'll see a text but I really think a lot of parents get a good gut instinctual feeling because a lot of parents have suffered with their own anxiety. I mean, I get kids in my office as young as 5 years old, and the parents will say to me, I remember feeling this way, or I see it.
So what type of anxiety would a 5-year-old have?
Okay, so just the other day, this little boy's afraid to use the bathroom. He's afraid someone's going to walk in. And that's what's so fascinating to me about how your brain handles anxiety. Mm-hmm. So you start to get a fear of something or a phobia, and then you want to avoid it. And then you're afraid that the fear and the phobia is going to come back. So a lot of times with young kids, it is bathroom based. I had one girl who's convinced an alligator was going to come out of the toilet. At that age, they have not much else to worry about.
Is that manifesting something else?
Right, so that's their
there?
anxiety.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
So then I sit with them and we kind of go over like what things make them worry. And then you can't believe the long laundry list. Recess. Who am I going to play with? How come this person can do math so quickly and I can't? Then it's your self-esteem. I mean, they're so aware.
I remember reading a study that said the number one thing that middle schoolers worry about going into middle school was forgetting their locker code.
You said that in your Providence, yep.
And I said, your locker code. But there's real studies around that, and what they talked about was it really wasn't the necessarily forgetting of the locker code.
Right.
It was the anxiety and the stress of having to remember something and this pressure
and
of
also,
that.
get there fast enough, get their stuff, get to class, not get a detention. When you talk about how different things are today, I think the number one thing that is hurting our children is the pressure they are putting on themselves.
Right.
It's not coming from us.
The studies show that there are 3 things that children right now are having issues with: sports, academics, and social media. That's their life. So you've got athletes, and by the way, it's no longer just the rec play. There's the travel this, and then of course the pressure of, I love when I go to any of the fields and I see the signs that say there's no college scholarships being given out today, but when rec fields have to put signs up that say to tell the parents to reel it in, but what we forget about is the pressure that puts that on. So a child that is starting to say they're having anxiety about going to the bathroom, a parent might say, well, just lock the door if you're worried about somebody walking into you.
But that is absolutely what is the foundation of anxiety. It's very irrational, right?
Right.
But it's super real to them. And that's what I tell these kids, right? We believe you. It's this fear and terror you feel is real to you, but you don't need to be afraid. And that's what anxiety is. It's all about being afraid. And it was in our brains for a reason, don't touch fire, don't run in traffic. But now we're walking around fearful all the time of so many things.
But where did that come from? Where do we think, is it just the pressure of society?
I think it's pressure. I mean, the other day, I'm on the Board of Education in my town. Somebody was brought up at one of the forums I was at about the drills, the emergency drills. Right. And I gave a talk to parents of preschoolers, and they were saying that at play dates now, the kids are role-playing panic drills. And so the parents didn't know what to do. And I said, well, they're acting it out. I mean, they're trying to process it, but they're afraid, But at the same time, the data shows, though, that they need to do these drills.
What do you think is the difference between today, the level of pressure and anxiety that's associated with the drills?
It is the media. Because what did they see on the news every night? They saw Columbine. They saw Parkland. It's constant. I think it's way overexposure.
Some kids could do lockdown drills all day, it wouldn't faze them. But when you have anxiety, you are more easily triggered.
So are you saying that certain children are predispositioned?
Yes. It's genetic.
Sounds like that parents need to create a baseline very early on so that they understand their child. Are they predispositioned for anxiety? What is the difference between normal tween and teen behavior and real levels of anxiety and stress? Because this is one of the things that I struggled with Mallory, is that some of the same symptoms that I now know in hindsight that Mallory was showing signs of anxiety and depression. And I said it to Seth, I think Mallory was hurting more than we could ever imagine. And I was like, and I just sometimes feel like I really failed her because I missed it. And that's why I want to do this, is that I think that many times as moms, we dismiss these because we don't want to blow it out of proportion.
Right.
And I caught myself sometimes saying to the counselors, well, sometimes Mallory likes to play the nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I'm going to eat some worms. because I would see that sometimes with her sister, who could tattle to me first. And what it really boiled down to is that was just normal, everyday
Correct.
mom-daughter behavior, sister's behavior of who could come there, oh my God, Carly took my remote, and oh my God, she took my skirt. That was normal.
Right.
But what happened as a parent is I transitioned that same everyday child behavior that I witnessed at home, and then I brought it to the school. So Laurel, what would you say is the difference between everyday tween behavior and what we're seeing now with children in this rising level of anxiety and stress and depression?
One of the things I think for sure is that I blame social media for most of this, because they never are free. There's always something coming at them. And when you, as a parent, you're not always aware. It's nobody's fault. You're not aware of the difference because they actually don't show it to you.
Right.
Mallory might say, nobody loves me, but in some situations, that's normal teenage behavior.
That's what I'm saying. Is
12-year-old behavior. But you have to look harder and deeper for the signs of, what is she really saying? What is she really doing? Who are her friends? What am I hearing?
You're talking about taking her temperature.
Taking
her mental temperature.
It's exactly.
And I point these out. There were things there that Mallory would say things that, again, in hindsight, her lunchbox would come home barely touched, and she would say, I'm not hungry. The truth is that at home, some days she had hungry days. She was a level 7 competitive gymnast. And so it was not uncommon for her to eat me out of house and home one day, and the next day, if I got her a granola bar in her system, that was great. So again, as a mother, nobody wants to admit that their child is being bullied, picked on, doesn't fit
Correct.
in. I think that a lot of times I downplayed maybe some of the behavior because I felt like if I blew it out of proportion, that I would have to almost acknowledge that what was really going on, and I'd have to dig in deeper. And so that's, again, only shows itself in hindsight.
Right, of
but
course.
when I'm living it.
First of all, Lily got very, very sick in kindergarten, and we almost lost Lily. And I go through that all the time. Like, I went to this doctor, we went to that doctor. So many things were missed, and it was so. But you don't know what you don't know. None of us ever would have done any of this on purpose,
Right.
missing signs or letting things happen. And so I understand that part of it. It's almost like mental abuse. We do it to ourselves. Like the guilt,
I
the
always
blame.
say that
Right.
hindsight is the worst
Right.
mental thing that we
Because
could
when you were
have.
in it, you were doing the best you could. I think this is what you have to understand, why everybody is so supportive and behind you, because of what you have done. The conversation is at the top of everyone's mind. When I went back to my hometown and I said, we have to have Dianne Grossman here because she changes behavior. So now what you've done here, the conversation is such that now we're going to ask, who are you sitting at lunch with? We're going
Right.
to say, look around you. If someone's sitting alone, include them. Like when you say kind is cool, I think it's happening more. I really do. We talk so much about how bad kids can be or the negative, but there's so many kind kids who want to do the right thing. And the interesting thing about tweens is like they're stuck in between that, they're little and big.
They're transition. They're in transition,
and
I
so
think
that's
that
so
is.
confusing in and of itself. Like
Right.
if you're on the like less mature side of it, you can feel a little left behind. Maybe you still want to play with your Barbies, but some of these girls are on Snapchat.
It's so funny that you bring that's true, because Mallory and her friend Bianca, they were in her room and they were playing and the door was locked. So I remember telling Mallory that your door's locked, I don't want the doors locked. After Bianca left, I didn't know about the videos that they had done. And again, they were completely innocent. I said to Mallory, I go, why was your door locked? Was something going on? And she looked me straight in the face and she goes, we were playing with our American Girl dolls and we didn't want anybody to know.
Oh.
And I thought that was such a great moment. Here she is, 12 years old. She's still in that transitionary phase, and that actually made me feel so much better about a parent, because she wanted to play with her dolls. She still wanted to be that young child. And then in a flip of a switch, she's playing dress up and fashion and wanting to be a teenager, experimenting with makeup and all
Right.
of that. And I often share that with people because I want people to understand is that in 1 minute, your 12-year-old can be wanting to experiment with makeup and then the next minute playing with dolls. And if they're doing that in the human form, then they're also doing that online. Then that means that they're 1 minute, they are looking at funny cat videos or puppy videos, and the next minute, they could very quickly be testing the water with a stranger that has asked them to show their boobs or to do things like that. And I think that that is so important that they could be that way.
I wanted to just get back to something Rebecca said. What I think people don't understand is trauma is always ongoing. You don't know as a young child that what you've had experience in the lunchroom, it's traumatic to you, but you don't know how to handle trauma. Trauma stays with you. It's like that movie reel that goes around and around and around and around in your brain. So somebody might say something to you that really hurts your feelings, but you don't talk to anybody about it. You just keep it in your head, and you don't share it with anybody. And the trauma is still there.
So the trauma could be the incident that sparks the already underlying
Correct.
anxiety.
That's
so
why I
could
brought
be,
it up, yeah.
I think that that's a really good point.
Your brain is an amazing, it just wants to protect you from all that.
It
you know?
really,
it is,
really
it's amazing,
does.
and you don't
So
even know what's happening.
So a child can have an underlying issue or be predisposed for a little bit of anxiety. They can have something very simple, traumatic happen on a playground or at school,
Right.
and then all of a sudden that incident can trigger the anxiety.
And I think then once your anxiety is triggered, you're always fearful it's going to happen again.
Right.
And then you start to fear the fear. And that's when it can become...
love that.
Yeah,
We start to fear the fear.
and
That's
I think
excellent.
that's when you talk about when do you reach out, when it's becoming a quality of life issue, when it starts to affect your quality of life, your relationships, your schoolwork, your functioning. You really have to constantly be encouraging them to talk to you.
Well, the other thing too is it's very helpful when they come home from school or you're talking to them. Always ask them an open-ended question. Yes. Don't let them answer yes or no. You have
stay
to
on it, because it might take all the way till bedtime, right?
Yes.
Until
Yeah.
they're ready and they're unwound from the day. You know, they've talked all day, or they've listened all day, or they have homework to do, or sports to go to. But then at the end of the day, that's when most of it will come out. You know.
Whenever I asked Mallory about some of her issues that she was having at school, she would always say to me, "I don't want to talk about it." And I feel like that when they say to you, "I don't want to talk about it,"
that's when you talk about it.
You talk about
Exactly.
it. That is such a key thing when they say, "I don't want to talk about it." That's them telling you that something happened, something's bigger, and if they talk about it, then it becomes real.
What's so fascinating, what happens, you know, we talk about what's going on in a counseling session. And, you know, you start off by, you go over confidentiality, and you want to build a rapport, get to know the person. Do they feel comfortable with you? Do you feel comfortable with them? And then it's like, at some point, magic starts to happen, right? And I always say, listen, yes, I've been trained, but I'm not smarter than you. I'm not better than you. Maybe I've survived a little longer than some of the age of my clients, right? So it's life experience. But sometimes the simplest thing, especially when you think about a child's brain, right? When they don't want to talk about it. I think sometimes they're so afraid of what their reaction is going to be. So I had a girl in my office, and she was so, you know, sunk into herself, and she didn't want to share. Her mother was in the room with me. I kind of pressed her a little hard, and the issue was at the time, she didn't want to take a shower after she came home from basketball. And her mom's like, you have to take a shower. And I'm like, come on, you don't want to be like the stinky kid. You know, we joke around. And then she was quiet, and I said, come on, tell me, what is it about taking a shower that is making you feel this way? I mean, sunken in. And she just sat up from her chair, and she's like, because I'm afraid my brother's going to come in the bathroom. The door lock doesn't work. And I was like, this is what we're doing here. And the mother turned to her and said, I had no idea. I'll get the bathroom door lock fixed. And I'm like, I didn't need to go to, you know, get master's degrees. And I'm just not in it. Right. I'm out of it.
I say we're just an impartial observer.
You know, but that moment, it gave her a chance to express herself. It gave her a chance to figure out what was the problem. And then there's something you can do about it. 9 times out of 10, there's something you can do about these problems. Right. And let's go back to, like, you know, whether it was Mallory at school or anyone at school. This is a big issue I have that I think is really important, is about advocacy, right? So I think another thing that's really happened when you talk about kids today and parents is this whole helicopter thing. I do not like when people say there's helicopter parents. I don't think it should be a negative thing. I think that when you take a child, they're 10, they're 11, and something goes on, the philosophy in a lot of places, schools, is the child should be able to advocate for themselves, right? Some 10-year-olds can,
right,
and some 20-year-olds cannot.
Right.
And so you cannot paint every child with the same brush. I do believe you want to teach your children to find their voice and advocate for themselves, but they are not always going to be able to do it. It's okay to know that you have their back and that you'll be there, and that no one should make you feel bad about that.
If we are constantly fixing things for our children and we're constantly doing something, and by the way, there is a lesson learned in failing.
First of all, there's an assumption in the schools that when they hit 5th grade, they're able to advocate for themselves. They are not ready. Their brain is not developed. You don't have to be a helicopter parent to have your kids back. But I also agree with you. If every road is so smooth and everything is so taken care of, how are they gonna function in the real world?
When the road is so smooth and you have a meltdown at your job, your boss is not going to come back to you and say, it's okay,
Don't worry
about
about
it.
it.
And so if you've had a life history, so
That's
what
it.
happens is, as a child, we develop these coping systems and we develop these,
Right.
and that's where I think some of our children are struggling with resilient behavior. I don't think that they're as resilient as they need to be. There is this tone that they graduate 5th grade, they have this big celebratory thing, and then when they go to middle school, the doors are locked,
Yep.
Right.
and you're not welcome here.
Yes.
And I experienced that with Mallory, but there was a time with Mallory that she would explain to me what lunch was like, why she wasn't eating lunch, why she didn't have anybody to sit with. And then when I spoke to the adults in the schools and the administration,
spin it.
they said that it was like this.
Right.
So I was having a difficult time seeing where was the truth in all of this. Now keep in mind, I'm listening to Mallory say to me, she doesn't have a seat at lunch, she doesn't have this, and then I have adults, and I grew up in an era where in my time that if the adult said it's black and it's white or whatever, then that's what it was. So I was bringing a lot of that training with me into having a conversation within a school system. And I was also dealing with a child that was the baby. She was the youngest. You know, she had a big sister. I had had a good history with the school system before then. So I did transfer a lot of the problems that I thought that Mallory was having at the time. So I'm trying to have a conversation with the school. I wanted to come in and observe lunch, not to critique them, not to criticize, but I had asked if I could come in and observe lunch so that I could have a visual as to what Mallory was telling me and what they were
said
telling
no,
me.
right?
And they denied me.
Yeah.
They said no, that I wasn't allowed to come in. And you are 100% correct when you say that there is this expectation that after 5th grade, it's lock the doors
Right.
and you can advocate for yourself and you can't
can't.
always
But
do
that's
so.
why after I, became one of your big fans and I was motivated by you, that I called the superintendent and I said, this is why I'm running for the board, because when Lily hit 5th grade and they were like, you're done, you're out. I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm not done and I'm not out. We need to partner. We need to all work together because, some of it is home stuff and some of it is school stuff, but it's all theirs. This is their world.
Well, it's a vegetable soup. And I love what you just said. As a parent, I was compartmentalizing that these were issues at school and that she was fine at home. When does that anxiety turn to depression? Because depression is more than sadness. And I do think that anxiety is a gateway to real depression. So Laurel, for you, when do you start to see this transition from anxiety to depression? Is there an age? Is there something that happens? Is there a traumatic event? When does
Could be any
anxiety-
of those things.
Any of those things.
But depression is a very slippery slope because someone could be depressed and just keep it in. They just are not going to share it with anybody. And
Can
they
they
suffer.
look normal outside?
Right. They
That's
look
what
normal
I was hoping
outside.
you would say
High
to me.
functioning, yeah.
High
sure.
functioning. So they lock it down and they go about their day and they do their things, but they are suffering so badly inside.
To a mother that is watching us right now and she says, I think something's up with my kid, what are some of the signs that we could see that their high functioning depression is real, that we should be worried? Because I think that because kids are impulsive and we're seeing this every day, they reach a point where they're like, I just can't take it anymore. They, for lack of better words, snap.
Right.
And I think that that's what's happening with a lot of our children, which is why I think we're seeing a high level of suicide skyrocket, is that they just reach a point and go, today's the day, I'm done.
Right.
So what would you say some of the symptoms are that you would see in a high functioning child that is depressed?
Well, they're not eating.
Okay.
They pull away from their friends. They spend a lot of time in their room. Their sleep pattern has changed.
I think cutting is a huge red flag. And then losing pleasure, like singing is like a gift and a pleasure, but now it's becoming like a job or
a chore.
Or more level of pressure and stress. And also school refusal is a huge red flag.
But the other part of it with suicide is that at young age, they don't understand that tomorrow could be better. They only are in the day.
We don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill.
Right.
We want our children to make good choices. We want them to have a healthy level of anxiety. There is a level of fear and anxiety, which is a great motivator.
Right.
As parents, sometimes I think that we are given such mixed signals when it comes to our children. Don't be a hover parent, but you need to let your kids fall down. Your child needs to have a good level of anxiety, but this level of anxiety is
It's
too
no
much.
good.
And I think that today's parents are getting mixed signals from society, from schools, from what their role really is.
And from each other.
Right, and so I think that that's difficult, and that's why I wanted to do this, and so that we could really talk about mental health as a whole, because it is a very relevant topic right now. It is something that I think parents are very confused about.
I agree.
Our children go through traumatic things, like what you talked about, whether it's grief, whether it's being embarrassed and humiliated, whether it's being isolated, whether it's used to be in a friend group. We see this all the time.
All of a sudden they're not.
And where they used to be a part of, say, a 10-friend group, and then all of a sudden something wakes up and those 10 friends are no longer 10 friends, they're now down to 6.
Right.
That is a traumatic thing that is part of everyday normal childhood. So I want you both to answer, because you're going to come at it from 2 different perspectives. But I get this email at least once a week where there was a group, and they're being excluded, which we know is part of HIB. We know that is traumatic. We know that that creates anxiety, and we know that that creates depression.
Right.
What do you say to a parent who is experiencing that right now? This is what their child has gone through. Tell us what that parent needs to do.
Well, first of all, the first thing I say is talk to your child about it. Let them express, how do you feel about this? Are there other children that you might want to strike up a friendship with? Do you want to get into a different group? If it becomes more than that, then I think at that time you should seek outside help.
You want to normalize it too, that this does happen. It's not good and it's not kind and it's not fun. But then you can share, like, this happened to me, to normalize it, or that's only happening to me, or I did something wrong, or I'm bad. I think so much of counseling is also, building up their confidence and their self-esteem, because anxiety can really rob you of that.
Right. I think normalizing was a really great point, and I'll tell you this why. I actually read an article years ago. I watched my own journey, and what made this article resonate with me so well is that I watched myself over time, every 3 to 4 or 5 years, all of a sudden my friend groups were changing so dramatically. I went from being great friends with someone, and then all of a sudden 5 years later, and I thought, God, am I really cutting people out of my life? Then I read this amazing article that says that the average woman every 7 years changes friends. Mm-hmm. And I thought, we need to be teaching that to young girls.
Right.
Because who you're friends with in kindergarten is not who you're friends with in 5th grade. Right. And that's only a 5-year span. So I think if we started early on explaining that it is normal for you to transition out of certain categories of friends.
I had a 7th grader, and she was going through this. Nobody would talk to her. Nobody would sit at the lunch table with her. She was the cutest thing you've ever seen. She was adorable. And we talked about it, and I said to her, you're better than this. You're absolutely better than this. But I have an idea. Why don't you find something to do during the lunch hour so you don't have to be in the lunchroom? Volunteer in the library. See if you can do something in the administrative office.
Like remove yourself.
Remove yourself from the situation.
But I think the key point is the child has to want to go and seek that. What do we do when the child doesn't want to seek an alternative way to have fun during lunch, when a child wants to be included? Because I know that relational bullying is a huge problem, and I really do believe that's what happened with Mallory, is that it wasn't a solution for her to remove herself from the situation because she wanted to be a part of these friends. And so I think that she would expose herself that if I do A, B, and C tricks, they'll let me be a part of this group. And so I think one of the issues that Mallory faced is that she wanted to be friends with these girls, and they were opportunists. They saw that she wanted to be a part of this, and they thought, okay, this is an opportunity for us. So what do you say to the parent who they want to be a part of that group? Like, they don't want to be excluded anymore. They don't want to go.
I tell the kids I work with all the time, listen, I think you need to find people that you feel comfortable with and that you can be yourself with, and look around in class or out of different activities, and just go towards the kind people and veer away from some of these things. You really have to get the kids to buy into that and understand that these aren't their friends, they're not genuine. And I tell kids a lot of times, you want to be a part of and apart from. You want to be part of a group, that's fine, but you always want to have your own thing. Like maybe you're a girl who does ballet, or she did gymnastics.
But what happens when that thing that they're a part of, they use that against her? They would tease her for being good at gymnastics, and they would make fun of her.
But that's where, like, whether a parent or a counselor really helps them to understand the whole jealousy competition thing, and that when people do that, that speaks much more about them than it does about you.
Right.
And they want to give them these coping skills, these resilience skills to be like, you know,
So that would be a moment that...
Right, that they're either jealous or they're insecure, or if you love it and you feel good about it, that's what matters.
I think this is a moment where a child needs to hear it from you and not the parent.
Right, it's
And
kind of
that's
like a
where I
math
think-
tutor. I mean, we had to pay fortunes of money because she couldn't teach me math and I couldn't understand math. But my tutor, she
found a way to
she
do
found
it.
a way to do
And
it, and
that's
it wasn't so personal. Like, what's wrong with you, or I'm letting you down, or it was just like, you know, here's your money, you teach me math, and you go home, and I go about my life. Like, so it's an outside person looking in who's not as invested or as emotionally attached and can just say things like, why would those people say that to you about gymnastics? Are they jealous? Are they insecure? Are they just mean? I had a boss once who said to me, don't give it room in the inn. And I was always like, what is he talking about? Because that's what happens. It gets into your head and it loops around, or it gets into your heart.
And that's what causes trauma.
You want to build that solid foundation that it's like, you know, with the old saying, you know, I'm rubber and glue, whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. That's easy to say, or sticks and stones, but words do hurt.
That's the reason why the Mallory's Army bracelet is on
To
a
remind
rock,
them, right.
that'll remind us that words do hurt,
Yes.
and that's one of the reasons why we
But
do
how
that.
do you kind of get that solid foundation to know, like my mom said to her client, like in 5 years it's not going to matter, but you really have to believe that I feel good about who I am, I'm happy with who I am.
But don't forget also, when I was working with her, it was repetition. I didn't just say it once, it was
And there
repetition.
was no social media at that time.
There was no social media,
Right.
but
Great point, because
Yeah.
that's what I actually was
Yeah.
going to transition over to, was the social media component, because I think that you are 100% right. I think that the data is there. It always comes back to screen time. I got an email from a parent. She wanted help. Here's what she said, and why we need to understand depression, anxiety, and why I was so excited about today's show, was the Kobe Bryant death. And she said, I don't know what to do. My child is so devastated and so sad over the Kobe Bryant, his death. I thought, you might need to go through some grief counseling. She goes, no, you don't understand. My son had no idea who Kobe Bryant was until he died. My son is not a basketball star, couldn't tell you his number, couldn't tell you anything. So I wrote back, I'm listening, tell me more, because there's something here. She said, my son had no idea who this basketball star is, didn't know anything about it, but because of the overexposure to sadness online, because all of his friends were crying, because all of his friends were putting up memorial videos and all of his friends were doing, there was this overwhelming sadness that was happening inside him, that he felt like, because the world was sad. And I thought, the power of the overexposure of social media.
But I believe that the social media in the house should really be restricted. It shouldn't be an all-day thing. I can't tell you how many times I walk down the street and I'm facing somebody with their face in the phone. Is it that important? Can't you wait till you get home? You have to be on Facebook, you have to be on Instagram, you have to be on Snapchat, or else you're not in the group.
The overexposure
Absolutely.
to sadness.
How many times did you see that helicopter picture?
Yeah.
With all the parts, it was sad.
What the mother's point in this, and the reason why she reached out, was it was truly sadness, and it was the social media and the overexposure, because he locked himself in his room and he was weeping. He was sad, and she goes, it was not normal.
Right, it was over-response.
So was there something else that was going
That's
on
what I
with
was
him
gonna- yeah.
that this triggered?
When I was doing a Mallory's Army School presentation, one of the kids came up to me, and when I say just bawling and crying, and the child said to me, they were upset, and I was like, oh, and he said, no, I'm not bullied or anything, but I feel like you do because my grandpa died. When my grandfather died, and he said, my grandpa died, and he kept talking, and so I just hugged him, and I said, you know, it is okay to feel sad and to miss someone and to love them, but my presentation triggered other underlying issues. So I said to the guidance counselor, I would call that mother and say, listen, there might be some other things going on, because my emotional presentation triggered something in that child. And that's exactly what I sent the email back to the mom about the Kobe Bryant situation. I said, number one, it's great to be empathetic and it's great to feel, but if he's locking himself in his room and he's sobbing, then my knee jerk tells me that he's upset about something else, and this just happens to be a way for him to release what's going on.
I think we just have to remember what is going on with the kids today, and that's what we talked about earlier. It is different than what you went through, I went through. And I think when you talk about, one of the first things you said in your province that stuck with me ever since is when you say how many adults these kids have to interact with, you know, on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I have used that, and I've talked to parents about that. You know, I think when we go back to what is the point of counseling or when to reach out for counseling, so much of it is educating people who aren't in schools and aren't familiar with how many teachers kids have to interact with, or their locker combinations, or where they're going to sit with at lunch, or the pressure they feel about grades, and what they're experiencing today and how it's affecting them. And then are flags to get some help? And just in terms of getting help, so you meet with a counselor and you talk, I think it also just destigmatizes counseling, and also for your life sets you up to know it's something you can always reach back for.
Do you think it's a healthy practice for parents to have someone, just like what you do with a pediatrician? Should you have someone in your life that is a family therapist or works with children, so that in the event when I have a need, to almost have them, like, introduce them? And what age would you say that would be?
I mean,
5.
yeah, it can be any age. When you know, I think having the knowledge of who to go to is good, but then when you start to see something, you're ready, and it's impossible to answer. I mean, I have people call me for 4-year-olds,
right?
And obviously, counseling for a 4-year-old is going to look very different than somebody who's older. But I think, yes, knowing who's in the resources, who's in your community.
I think just like we look for a pediatrician with a newborn, I think that by 3rd grade in your Rolodex or in your phone, you should have a family therapist or someone, because I think that, let's hypothetically say the kid is just having a normal, everything about them. But I do think that come 3rd, 4th in grade, when puberty kicks in, but more importantly, when these friend groups start to shift.
Right.
Because what I think what's happening with our children is, because they're not as social and because they're being introduced to technology so early on, that one of the issues that they're not building is resilient behavior. They're not finding common ground with one another.
Social skills.
And so social skills are becoming something that needs to be taught and not just learned over time.
Right.
And so because of that, I think that to say to a parent, you need to have someone in your Rolodex, I think by 3rd grade, the best advice I could ever give a parent is to have somebody established that you know upfront what their fees are, so that you can budget for it, right? So you know going into it that, just like with tutoring and all of that, just like you plan for tutoring come maybe 7th or 8th grade, when math starts to get a little bit harder than what you can teach to, I think that know who you would go to, have a pre-interview with them, know what their fees are, understand what it would cost you, because I think that that's being proactive rather than being reactive. Well, I want to thank you both for doing here. We're going to make sure that people have access to your information, your websites, your phone numbers, so that in the event that people have questions. Any last minute points real quick, Laurel, before we go?
I just think that it's so important for parents also not to take all the responsibility on their shoulders. We don't know everything.
Right.
No, we're all born blank, and we learn as we grow. And we have the tendency to say, I could have done this, I should have done this. Your mind is constantly going, and these kids' minds are constantly going. We just have to be the support system for them.
And I would agree, and I would just, to sum up kind of what I know the goal of this was, is that if you even have the slightest doubt, just reach out. Reach out to, it doesn't matter if it's a social worker, a psychologist, a family therapist, just reach out and ask questions. And if you don't get your questions answered, ask someone else until you feel like you've gotten a partner and someone to help navigate all this.
I always say that, remember when you'd leave behind the telephone numbers for the babysitter, like who to call, poison control was on your refrigerator.
Leave the social worker's number.
I think the social worker's number needs to be on your fridge, and I think that my takeaway from today, and I think it's hopefully for everybody that's watching us, is that we need to be proactive, make sure that you have people in your Rolodex, make sure you have a good understanding
of the process,
I think,
and how it
of that, and I think there is great resources because we have the access to instant information at our fingertips.
Right.
Then let's be proactive. I want to thank you both for being here. I love the dynamic between the mother-daughter team. I think you came at it from really great 2 different perspectives, all of us today, and I think that this is going to be a great episode for our parents.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
we are
thank you.
huge
We are
fans of your heart, your voice, and what you're doing, and we 100% know it's working.
Well, you got to get involved. You got to do that, and it's what we did today. So thank you so much for today. Thanks.